So, Mr. McDonald, lots of people have said they're the only person in the private sector. You too have been in the private sector before you began your nonprofit work. So there is the subject broadly.
Can I just say, Jack is fantastic, and I'm glad I'm not running against him.
Yeah, not yet anyway.
Well.
Well, he committed very forthrightly to saying there needs to be this specific commitment to a budget line for arts education, music classes, art classes, dance, theater, the rest of it in schools. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I do. I think it's a very important part of the future economy of New York City. Obviously, we have tourism as one of the growing businesses for our future, and the arts and the culture of New York City is important for people all over the world to come here. I myself am an artist. There were two stories in the New York Times last week. One about my house and buying it from John Catsimatidis on East 84th Street in 1989. And in the picture, the thing that I love the most about it, in the picture of me in the office in my house is a work of art that I painted on the wall. You can only see 3/4 of it. And then later on in the week in the home section, they had a story about how my wife and I bought Raphael Gustavino's house in Bayshore, Long Island, that was on the 7 to save list, landmarks to save. And Gustavino is a well-known architect and tile, structural tile. And he built this house for himself and his family in Bayshore. And it was empty for 5 years and was going to be destroyed. And it is magnificent, and we saved it. So I have an interest in arts and historical preservation, both by being a painter myself and also by recognizing Gustavino's great house.
Well, congratulations on owning fantastic real estate in Long Island and the Upper East Side. But
read the article.
I will. Under the Bloomberg administration, among other things, in terms of education, is this great growth in charter schools.
Yes.
Doubled in the last 4 years, probably doubled in the 4 years before that. It's now 5% of New York City children going to 160 odd charter schools. Is that a worthwhile experiment? At this point, it's sort of beyond an experiment. Should that doubling continue?
I was going to say it definitely is beyond a experiment, and I think that we ought to learn. After all, the charter schools are New York City public schools, and I think that we ought to learn the valuable lessons for all of our schools that we're learning in the charter schools and in the advanced New York City public schools. It's not like we don't have creativity going on in our school system in other places other than charters. I think that, and you didn't ask this, but I'm going to say it, I think that the next mayor has a great opportunity to be able to burst this bubble of animosity between the teachers' union and the mayor. I liken it to 12 years ago when Michael Bloomberg was elected mayor. There was great racial tension in our city. Any of us that lived here then know that, and because the previous mayor wouldn't meet with people of color. So you can understand how they felt excluded. And as soon as Mayor Bloomberg was elected, he did meet with people of color, and he had an inclusive administration. And that, just almost overnight, took the pressure of racism out of our city. And I believe that we can do that with the relationship between the mayor and the teachers union.
Well, actually, there is a pressure right now of racism in the city. It's
well, there is now.
In the schools.
I was using that as an example of that time. I mean, we're all smart enough to understand what I was saying, right? Mm-hmm. That I was talking about 12 years ago.
Frisk. I understand. Okay.
Right. No, I mean, you know, we have to be careful in these campaigns because they will take things out of context, and then somebody will say tomorrow, "Oh, McDonald said there wasn't any racial tension in New York." But, you know, I'm the only man, or the only person rather, that talks about the mass incarceration of African American men in America, and how that's devastated African American families, and how our shelter system and the Doe Fund's shelters are filling up with young men 18, 19, 20, 21 years old who aren't educated, who can't work, and who have criminal records. And if you want to burst that bubble of racism that we feel today, let's get jobs and educate the young men of color in our city. And we won't have to worry about the police tactics. There won't be any, because we will be safe. That is the last frontier of public safety, is getting jobs for these young men who have no hope.
It is.
Thank you.
It is schools with worse graduation rates, worse outcomes, as it happens, perhaps no coincidence, that are most deprived of money for arts education in school. And I want to thank my collaborator on this next question, who is a student from Queens, just graduated from LaGuardia High School, headed to NYU. Thank you, Candace Lee Camacho, who may be in the audience still if she's put up this long with what we're doing. In any event, beyond the general funding issues, which I would love you to talk about, of $300 a kid per year for arts education in New York City, how do you address the growing inequality between what kids in schools in neighborhoods where their parents can't afford to buy them instruments and can't afford to buy them the art supplies that the city of New York is no longer paying for?
Well,
how do you address that?
I mean, there's the commitment that you're getting from everybody to spend more money, a point and a half on, and I think that that's reasonable. But I believe that the unsustainable portion of our city budget is the health insurance that city employees don't pay for any of it. So I'm proposing that they pay 20%, which, well, nobody, in the private sector, we all pay for a portion of our health insurance. The federal government pays for it, the state government pays for it, and you know what? Michigan paid for it too, Detroit. And now look at the shape that Detroit is in. Every New York City employee has a salary, and then 70% of that salary is fringe. Now that's unsustainable. We can't do that any longer. But if we get we're all in this together, then we'll have money to be able to do this. And that's the problem. It is unsustainable, ladies and gentlemen, our city budget, the way that it's going. And the uncontrollable costs for the city are the pension plans, because that's the state legislature. And you know what they do. The state legislature is like a slow motion crime wave. So you can imagine what these pension plans are all full up. The last 3 years that somebody works, overtime, and all of that wonderful stuff. There's not much that the mayor can do about that. But there is something that we can do about the health insurance. And we can reform the health insurance and make it better for the city employees at the same time while they recognize that we're all in this together.
You mentioned that the arts are really important to the city's economy, tourism, jobs, et cetera. Well, how would you pay to support those institutions? Well, you're not going to take that out of the health fund. The city.
Well, sure. I mean, I heard an idea.
How much money can you get out of the
startups? Well, you can get $1.6 billion, actually. You can get a lot of money. I mean, but I heard before talking about startups and those kinds of things. I started a not-for-profit myself. I went to Grand Central Terminal after a woman died of starvation in the richest country and the richest city in the center of it. And, I said to the people laying there, if you want to work, I'll provide an opportunity and we'll put together an organization. And that's all I had, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't have a penny. I lived in a 6x9 SRO room 2 blocks away from where I live now on East 81st Street. And I went to Grand Central Terminal for 700 nights in a row, feeding people. And I listened to what they said. I didn't know why people were homeless when I went there. But I listened. I heard what they said. They appreciated the sandwich, but they wanted a room and a job to pay for it. A room and a job to pay for it. I became convinced that they wanted to work And I put together a program for them to work, and now we do $50 million a year. We've done $750 million in revenue since we started. We clean 150 miles of New York City streets and sidewalks every day, and we provide an opportunity for people to climb that economic ladder, upward mobility. All folks who didn't have a chance before, who have prison records and who are African Americans, so they're born behind the 8 ball in this country.
Well, nicely said.
Well, it's not nice to say. It isn't, but we have to start saying it. Because if we want a safe city, if we want a productive city, if we want a city where we recognize, look, you go to Central Park on a Sunday afternoon and there's people from all over the world, 220, 230 different countries, all getting along. We can have that if we just take this final piece and we educate and we provide economic opportunity for these folks. They deserve it, and it's time that we as a city recognized it.
And in terms of educating them, is it your view, as it has been so many of the candidates this evening, that we are focused and have been focused too strictly and narrowly on the results of standardized tests?
Oh, I think that teachers ought to be involved in developing the curriculum. I think that we ought to have somebody with educational experience as the head of the Department of Education. So I would move to the Common Core and not focus on the test so much. First of all, I don't think that there are people, some children really don't test well. I mean, my grandson, so I have 4 children and 3 grandchildren. My 4 children, 2 of them went to New York City Public Schools, and my 2 grandsons go to New York City Public Schools. So I have some experience with it.
But I'm sure he appreciates you not embarrassing by saying exactly how badly he does on tests.
Didn't do well.
Just one more thing. The current mayor believes that the government should give less money, philanthropists should give more money. We're seeing museums say that there's been a permanent decline in public support for higher education, the difficulty of donors, of obtaining donors for governing boards, and a shift in philanthropic focus that's affected them all across the country. Well, if we're going to rely on philanthropists, and philanthropists are not going to give money to the arts, they're giving less and less to the symphony orchestras and the museums, excuse me, giving more to other kinds of causes if they're giving money at all. So where does the money come from?
Well, I think that we should take it, the 6-to-1 matching funds that somebody who's tweeting things that a few years ago wouldn't be allowed in a museum. That's Wiener is getting matching funds, so he's getting your money to do his rehabilitation or whatever you want to call this that he's doing. No, seriously, he's getting matching.
Who's Wiener? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Only wish. Then maybe we could talk about the issues. Well, but I would be in favor of some kind of matching fund program that the city and private dollars, I don't know exactly what, but I think that to encourage philanthropy, matching grants have always been a part of it. We raise 1/3 of our budget from private sources, 1/3 from the city, and 1/3 through earned, generated revenue work that we do. So we're familiar with needing different funding streams. And I think that it would behoove the city to get involved with some kind of a cultural matching or multiplier of private money to encourage all of these wealthy people who live here, right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you.